showing up. And there we go. All right. This should appear on YouTube in just a few seconds. So welcome to the special IANDS Groups and Events presentation. Greetings and welcome. I'm Daniel NDE, your host, with this special live edition of the IANDS Author Spotlight. Our very special guest is best-selling author and spiritual teacher, living with Charlene, his wife of 25 years, and his children, and their dog Willie in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. As an infant, Franco had a near-death experience that would lead to a series of clairvoyant encounters throughout his life, abilities he was unwilling to recognize until an awakening in his mid-40s, a spiritual event that would change his life forever. In addition to being a teacher, Franco holds 2 master's degrees from the University of Minnesota. So please give a warm welcome to our very special guest, Franco Romero.
Hello there.
Hello, Franco. Good to see you again.
Wonderful to see you, Daniel. Thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, it's absolutely our pleasure. I've done I've done more preparation for this conversation than any other guest or interview.
All right.
I've been through your book twice.
Wow.
Here's the cover. If folks are interested, I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
So to start things off, let's fast forward through a few things so we can get to lots of interesting material that's deep within your book.
Yes.
I'll mention that there are a few other interviews with you on YouTube, and one in particular by the documentary filmmaker Anthony Shane, I believe is the pronunciation.
You're pretty close. Anthony Chen.
And he does fabulous videos, and yours with him is, that may have been how I first saw you. And that's pretty recent. That's just a couple months old.
You know, it feels like a longer period of time, to be honest with you. But yeah, it's only actually been out for about, not even 3 months yet.
Yeah.
About 2.5 months.
So you had an experience at 6 months old.
Yes.
Where you were very close to death and may well have died.
Mm-hmm.
And then 16 years later, you remembered that experience. You had a spiritual experience where you remembered that. Is that right?
Pretty much, yes. Up until that time, I had a lot of other spiritually transformative experiences, but specifically to that event, it started when I was about 15 and we went for about a good year.
Okay. Can you give us an overview of some of the other spiritual events before that?
Well, probably the biggest one, and the one that had the most impact on me, was that for about 6 years, from the time I was about, I was about maybe 6, early 7 years of age, we moved into a house that was, for all practical purposes, haunted. And so in those years, I call those years the hauntings, because basically everything that you could imagine that could have happened in that home happened. You let your imagination go, and it happened. And I know there's always the question, why did you stay? Well, first of all, I was only 6, 7, so I had no say in the whole matter. But it was a very powerful experience, to say the least. And it was in that time period that I actually first was introduced, not only to the supernatural and the paranormal, but also to this collective that later on would know themselves, or let me know them as Caleb.
Right. So as often happens with experiencers, they become open.
Yes.
The veil is thinner. So that was happening to you. And I do remember now that you you said you heard footsteps going up the stairs every night.
That was, that was usually on a good day in terms of what would happen. Yes. It was pretty natural for me to hear a lot of things happening up in the attic area of our home, where there was nothing up there that should have been happening. Footsteps were common at certain hours of the night, and I could feel, and that's the big thing. I could feel the heaviness of this entity that was marching itself up the stairs and down the stairs quite a bit in our home. And that feeling was there in other occasions as well in our home that were more obvious and not so pleasant.
And you said that Caleb comforted you.
Right. Back then you're 6 or 7. And so you develop a relationship with this voice. And so you immediately assume that you are having a relationship with an imaginary friend. And to me, under the circumstances, this was all very normal for me to have this. And what they would normally do pretty much every night, it was kind of their ritual to tuck me into bed, not in the sense of really physically tucking me into bed, but I would be in bed. I would hear these noises coming from the other side of my wall, which was aligned with the staircase going up to the attic. And they would speak to me, and most of the time they would just reassure me that everything was fine, that whatever it was that I was hearing and experiencing in that home wasn't there to hurt me specifically. That my light, they kept saying my light shined too brightly for them to hurt me. And that was reassuring. I mean, that's all I needed at that age, to know that I was fine. I didn't question the voices. I felt they were as natural as if my mother was tucking me to bed at night and telling me the same thing. And this went on for, like I said, 5, 6 years. So all the events that happened in the home, which I'll just give you a few highlights. We did have an exorcism at our home. It was really intense. It was, for all practical purposes, very similar to what you can imagine an exorcism to be like. People going in and out of our room, specifically the room which was my bedroom. There were a lot of instances there of, let's just say, minor possession, if you will, not with me, but with my brother. And so it was clear that the entity, the density of that energy was in our room most of the time. And so that's where the exorcism took place. And it was long. It was loud. It was pretty dramatic, to say the least.
And where was this in the world?
I grew up in Chicago at the time.
Okay.
And so it was there. I grew up most of my life, or most of my younger life there, in just the blue collar area of the city. So we were very Catholic. And these kind of things were not necessarily the things that you expect, but they are handled in certain ways. And the paperwork involved in getting an exorcism done back then, and probably still today, was pretty extensive. In fact, it was, I really never shared this part even with you before. It was denied by the Roman Catholic Church. So it was done sort of offline, if you will, by the priests in our parish who were not trained to do this. And it was pretty obvious early on that they were up against something that they didn't really fully know how to handle.
Wow.
Yeah.
And well, how is your brother these days?
He became a minister.
Okay.
So it had a very impactful experience on him. It was pretty intense. Yeah. So it's interesting because our lives kind of went in somewhat similar ways, but not necessarily by intent. In his case, he became a minister, and he viewed his experience as he probably should have, because if I would have lived it in his shoes, I probably would have felt the same way. It was more in the way that you were taught to believe back then, and even still today, the whole idea of good versus evil and how that all plays out. So that's why he became a minister, and an evangelical minister. So so very, very, very committed to his faith. Whereas with me, I struggled with it. I struggled with any aspect. I was never really religious. It was hard for me to be religious because there was something about my life that was kept reminding me, if it wasn't the supernatural, paranormal events of our home, there were just sort of this innate feeling that I wasn't quite fitting into this body that I came into this world with, and I saw things extraordinarily different. I just assumed that everybody had paranormal experiences. I just assumed that everybody had voices that they spoke to. That was my world. And it wasn't until I got into my early teens that I realized that, well, no, that's not what most people experience. And that became the sort of the genesis for my spiritual crisis, if you will, tucking it all in under the rug.
So tell us about that then.
Well, when I finally started to realize that things were not, let's say, quite quote unquote normal, was when I started around the age around 15. I started to have dreams, and they were very lucid dreams, and they sometimes happen just in the sort of right at that moment when you're waking up. Yes.
Before that,
yeah, go for it.
After the exorcism, were things quiet in the house?
No. No, we eventually had to move out of that house because if anything, we just bothered whatever it was that was there. And so it made it very difficult for us to live there any longer. And so we moved on.
Thank you for that.
It did actually follow us to the next house, but that's for another time.
Boy.
Yeah.
Well, when did it leave you all?
We stayed at another place about a couple miles away for a couple of years, and in that time period, it eventually just by natural forces decided to just leave us alone, really.
Since we've delved into this territory, and
yeah.
I'm familiar with it to some degree, I've been very interested in these things. And what is your current understanding of things that go bump in the night and scare us?
That's a really great question, because I've been asked that many times. Even though the paranormal piece of my story doesn't get a lot of the attention, when it does, I get that question asked. And so here's the best explanation I can give you. The paranormal is, I want to describe it within the context of how we've been brought up with this whole idea of good and evil. Okay.
Right.
I always tell people that there is negative energy that exists in our third dimensional plane of existence. It's really the only place that it can exist is in 3D. However, it is not by nature, by its own natural volition, evil. And what makes it evil per se is our perception of it, or our attention to that specificness of that energy. In other words, what happened in my home was a perfect storm. Yeah. There was negative energy in that home already.
Right.
It may or may not, from what I understand, did not before we moved in, and has not since we moved out, manifested itself in any kind of demonic way.
Right.
But we came in as a family, and we were carrying our own negative energy, and I was carrying this ability to perceive the world in a certain way through at the time I didn't know it, my abilities that I had, my clairvoyant abilities, that when those forces came together, and I told you that I perceived them to be natural, it became natural in that home. And so for a lot of people, when they experience paranormal activity, it's because they're putting their consciousness energy into either either into creating that negative energy or enhancing that negative energy into the point that it becomes, well, whatever you want it to become, demonic or what have you. It's why
So,
when people practice the occult, so to speak,
yeah.
it's in their intention to drum up that energy. That energy does not exist in and of itself, but when you place your attention on it, it will create itself.
What I say is, just like there are nice people and not so nice people in this world, in the world just outside of this, not quite in the upper dimensions, there are also some nice spirits and not so nice spirits.
You know, and that's a really good way of saying it. You're really kind of, you know, simplifying it to the max, and that's good. I will tell you this, and it's something that I really feel that for whomever this is relevant to, who's listening, it's really important that they understand that in the higher levels of dimensionality, even in the, not what I'm talking about, we're in the third, we're also existing in what's called the fourth dimension and now the fifth dimension. All these energies are now here. But when I'm talking about the higher levels of dimension, the upper five dimension and the sixth, seventh, and beyond, those energies cannot exist there. And that's really important that people at least try to put their arms around, because when we have, the way we've been taught is that these energies, these forces exist at a level somewhere high above, that they're almost considered to be demigods. Like in the way that we were raised, like the way I was raised, at least with Catholicism, where you had the devil and Satan and all that. You cannot, by universal law, you cannot have that type of energy exist beyond pretty much just the lower ends of the fifth dimension. And that's even stretching it, because that energy is incredibly dense. And if people just kind of sat back and realized that as you go higher in the dimensional scale, that energy becomes extraordinarily light. And so you cannot have, by virtue, a heavy, dense energy in those higher dimensions. It just doesn't work that way. It can only exist in this dimension. So we put too much power into the creation that we actually had a lot to do with.
Right.
In that negative energy.
So it's my understanding that we give them power by being afraid.
Bingo.
And that by being kind and loving and compassionate towards those, we essentially, they don't like that, or they do like it and they change their character, or they don't like it and they say, I'm out of here.
You know, in fact, it's probably more of the way that you described it, that if you can express light to them, they actually remember who they are, what they are as light. All of this energy is light, pure light, unconditional loving light, to be honest. And if you can show them how to remember that, they'll fade away, because they will become light again. It is because of the way that we perceive, since we are creators of this reality, which we haven't gotten into, but since we create from this reality, we have the power by which to take any energy and manifest it into a heavier, dense energy of negativity that looks like demonic. And because of unconditional love as the rule of the way that we exist, that energy will turn itself into whatever we want it to manifest into. If we could understand that, we could turn all aspects of negative energy back to where they were. Everything that you're seeing through the chaos of the world works the same way as this demonic energy that I'm referring to. You are the focus of how that energy ultimately manifests itself.
So it's my understanding also that by resisting it, we give it power, and by allowing it and loving it, casting light on it, that we're transforming or transmuting it.
Absolutely. I don't know if everybody's seeing me shake my head here, but yeah, I mean, nodding my head. Okay, nodding my head, because that's exactly, it's the difference between creation and reaction. And so some of the work that I do with students is to show them the power that we have in our perception. If we actually react to something in our environment, we are giving it power by
So this
virtue.
is, yeah, go ahead.
No, and so what I show them is that by subtly changing that energy frequency, which is basically created from, if you take those two words, Daniel, and you look at them side by side, and I think maybe you and I did this once, you will see that creation and reaction are spelled by the same letters. And when you move the C around, you are actually changing what's called the energetic signature of that energy. And you literally go from a situation that looks identical, but it's 3D and you're reacting to it. In other words, reinforcing that energy, giving it more and more power to creation, where you no longer give it the power and you remind yourself who you are and you give it, like you said, love and compassion. And therefore now you're giving it back what it was to begin with. It's no longer feeding the loop, chasing the tail.
Now let's slide over into creation of our reality. Along these same lines, for me, when I hear negative things, like in the news or wherever, I have trained myself now to not believe it and to turn it to the positive and to have a positive attitude towards it and not resist it. And I believe that is like cutting edge approach to negativity in this world. And it's part of why I don't watch the news, because they're trying to insert, and I don't think they're doing it consciously or intentionally. I'm not in that mindset. It's just that we have for so long been creators by default, where we create with this very dense 3D energy that's come from generations upon generations upon generations of false beliefs that we've adopted. And that right now, part of why I love your book, it's about, this is the transition. This is the turning point.
Yes.
Say some more, please.
Wow, Daniel, which part? Because you just, there was at least 15 different directions we could go, because that was a real loaded comment you just made. I want to kind of speak to like that part about the television. And it kind of gets back to what we were talking about with the hauntings.
Yeah. We
have never been taught, okay, to see ourselves as creators. It gets thrown around a lot. It's a really good, sexy term, but we don't really understand what that truly entails. And so part of what I do is I try to get people to really dig deep within themselves to find the truth of what that means. Because if you can do that, Daniel, then you can do what you just said, which is very cutting edge, which is to say that you can take an aspect, let's call it the news, that just gives you the ugliness of everything that's happening, and you can literally stand there and take that energy, filter it into, so you take it in with empathy, you filter it, and you distill it back out as compassion. When you can do that, you are going from reaction to creation. And that is cutting edge, because that's exactly where we're going now in this time period, not 100 years from now. Right now, we're learning to remember that we have to breathe again. We have to know how to take this energy that often looks very distorted, confusing, depressing, and know how to filter it out again in compassion. And when you can do that, it just starts to change the complexion of your whole narrative. You literally are changing your reality from 3D to 5D. And that is extraordinary cutting edge. That's not to be taken lightly.
Exactly.
And that's where people are at right now. They have to break the behavioral pattern of believing that this reality that they're in is real. It's an illusion. And the crazy thing is, and I say that lightly, the crazy thing is that it's an illusion that's being created by you, by you meaning the person who's ever listening here. It's you that are creating this illusion. You, because of the way you were socially conditioned into this world, you are reinforcing the narrative over and over and over. what makes this time period so different is that we are now at a level of what we call fifth dimensional energies that, by the way, does require you to go through a fourth dimensional portal. People always just assume we're going to go the third to fifth, but nevertheless, we're in this fifth dimensional state of consciousness where the true ascension, the true awakening, the way that it was shown to me in my near-death experience and in other subsequent channeling, is that we are here now to take all of this minutia, everything we've been taught to believe about ourselves, and break through the veil, which is not very thick, but it's thin. It's thick enough that you think it goes for eternity, and show yourself consciously as a consciousness that you can differentiate between what this world is and the world of duality. That's the test.
And in doing that, you can go from being depressed about something you've heard or something that's going on to being optimistic about the transformation that we're in right now. And
in seconds.
To see that positive and to focus on it, we're bringing it closer, I believe.
Absolutely. For what's coming through. So, because we've talked, that the way that I operate is that I just instantaneously, the light switches go on and I start to filter this collective known as Caleb. And I could explain that a little bit more in a few minutes, but what's coming through is that the people that are really immersed in their spiritual quest, and who are doing the research and they're doing their own self-empowerment, and who are listening to conversations like this, they're doing this not to learn anything. They're doing this because they're trying to remember something. And that is huge. That is a huge difference, because to remember something means that you're already there.
Yeah.
You don't have to go anywhere to get there. It's not a journey, which is why I always tell people that the way I differentiate between journey and a quest is that we've been taught that a journey is this odyssey of things that have to happen in the hopes that maybe you achieve whatever it is that your goal was. Mm-hmm. And that's all external. That's all 3D. That's all playing right into the illusion that you think is this life. Right. If you go inward and go into the quest, you realize that the quest is about knowing that you're already there and just trying to remember that you're already there so that you can fulfill what you came here to do, which was simply to wake up.
To remember. Yes.
Remember and wake up. Yes.
This is why I love your book. And I love you, brother.
Thank you. Thank you. I love you too, man.
Same wavelength.
I know. Our heads usually blow up after an hour of conversing with each other. I know that. That's why I was excited to talk to you again.
So, where should we go next?
Well, if you'd like, I could certainly share a little bit of the experience of my near death. And then because I think sometimes people have a question. I know people have a question about how is it possible that you could have experienced this 15 years later? And I understand that is confusing, because it was confusing to me. However, as I've explained to people, when you get into the metaphysical side of the equation, as you know, there is no such thing as time and space. Everything happens in the now. So whether it happened 15 years ago, it happens now, or 15 years from now in a linear timeline that exists here only in this 3D world, it's all still happening at right now. That's all you have. This is right now. So for me, the experience of going back, which was unbeknownst to me as it started, was simply a remembrance of something that took me back into that moment, real time. I felt everything that somebody would have felt had they passed away, at least as far as comparing notes with other NDErs.
So it's like a past life experience, but it was this life.
Exactly. That's a great way of explaining it. It's like you basically have done some kind of a regression therapy and you're there again, because there is no such thing as time. Yeah. So when I went back, and I was about 15, at that time I was having some crises that, many kids have at that age, but they were, again, really, They were very intimate. They were deeper. They were asking questions that a 15-year-old usually doesn't ask. Nevertheless, I would have these dreams, and I find myself in the hospital where my mother was younger and my family was there and my aunts were younger. And I basically was a visitor there, but I was not seen or heard. I could sense I was really, really well connected with my mother. Everything in that room was visual, but everything I felt was beyond the visual. I felt feelings. I felt emotions. I felt their consciousness. I felt what they were thinking at the time. And to me, that's what was the most, up until then, I hadn't really had any dreams like this, but it was the most extraordinary thing was that I felt in tune with my mother. And I was there when she received the news that first of all, I went into that hospital 6 months because I was ill. And she brought me in to see if everything was fine. I was having a hard time breathing. I was coughing a lot. She thought I just had a chest cold, nothing huge. The doctors at first felt the same way, but wanted to keep me for observation. And a few hours into this, it was obvious that I was getting worse and worse and worse, and that they could see that my vitals were going down, that my organs were starting to shut down, similarly to as if I was going through the process of dying. And at that point, they asked my mother, and the main doctor came into the room and asked to talk to her just outside the door of her room. I was there. It's kind of like in the movies. I was there listening to everything, but yet they were obviously not aware of anything. And so I heard the whole conversation, how they said that I wasn't going to live more than a couple hours at best. And they wanted to see if the hospital could make things comfortable for her and the family by bringing a priest, reading my last rites, and so on. And at that moment, everything in the room changed. The energy in that whole room just completely, it was as if she checked out and the energy had switched to something else. I was fully in tune with what she was feeling and her consciousness stream, which was all she wanted to do was get out of there. And so she went and left the hospital, went a few blocks to a nearby church. And when she got close to the church, my mother was incredibly devout, to say the least. She got on her knees, crawled into the church, went into the front part of the altar, and began to pray in a very meditative state. And I remember watching her and seeing the way that she was acting, and as I was picking up on her energy, it was an energy that was full of gratitude and appreciation. And I thought that it was rather odd, because you would think that in that situation, you're thinking, please, 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 can you save my child? That type of energy. But instead, she was very grateful and appreciative of the time that she had, the 6 months that she had with me. And that was the gist of her prayer, was just knowing that she had the time to be my mother, to feel the love that she had for me, the love that I gave her back. And that if things did end that night, which she was expecting, that she was eternally grateful for that time. And in that moment, there was a stream of visions that started to appear in her consciousness. And that was an image of me much later in life, being very productive, being a good person, a good father, a good husband, a good son, doing some things for the community and the world. And she got a chance to see that. And she again was enormously grateful for the opportunity. She told me later that she didn't even understand why she was having those visions. But what happened in that moment was that she actually realized that she could never see a world without me. And that was really key, because what she didn't realize, and as I talk about this in the book, is that she didn't know her own innate ability to move mountains. And so when she came back from the church, she was expecting to be greeted by the doctors and everybody with the bad news. And she was greeted by everybody, but she was greeted with tears of joy, because in that short time period that she was gone, everything changed with me. My vitals came back, my organs came, the functionality of my organs, they came back, everything. They basically said I was pretty much free of whatever it was that I had, the bronchitis or what have you, the pneumonia that I had, whatever it was, and that it was a miracle. And back then, and even still today, that's kind of how they chalk things up, was just, it was a miracle and life went on. So none of this I was aware of. And then the complementary visions that I would have were when I actually crossed over. When I actually saw myself leave that hospital room, because it didn't take much for me to realize that what was happening and the vigil that was going on with that 6-month-old baby in the room was me. And when I crossed over, and what I saw and experienced when I went into the light was nothing short of extraordinary. There was no word in the English or any language that could explain the blissfulness that you feel when you start to experience yourself the immersion of yourself as oneness with everything that is light. And when I got into that point and I actually was in the light, the way that I describe it in the book is that it was it was as if somebody had given me a million hugs. To be honest with you, I tell people there are 50 trillion cells in your body. And what I really felt in that moment was 50 trillion states of extreme blissfulness. And the crazy thing, Daniel, was that I didn't even experience it as me experiencing all this kind of incredible energy running through me. I experienced it as if I were actually all 50 trillion cells observing myself experiencing bliss. And I'll never forget that, because it was such a bizarre feeling to experience yourself in 50 trillion ways. I just can't describe that and better. In that time that I was there, and I'm sort of abbreviating some of the pieces of this, but in that time that I was there was something that happened to me that I did not originally take note of until many years later. And that was that before I left this experience of the light, and I was greeted by all of these images of energy, these silhouettes of energy that I didn't see faces. There was no characterization of anything, but I knew them as family and everything that was there. And there were endless number of beings in this light, and I knew them all, and they knew me, and I knew them from lives way beyond this world. I mean, we had history, and it was incredible what I could remember about that. What I realized, because there was this entity, this flow that was actually kind of like guiding me through this whole experience. It didn't really say a whole lot to me, but at the end, it kept insisting that I look around and explain what I was experiencing. I look back at this and I think it's really kind of odd that they did this, but I know now why. When I looked around and I saw this stream of endless beings, I mean, you can count these beings forever and you would never come close to counting how many beings there were in this light. I realized many years later, and this is at the point when I did realize it this is when I got pulled back. I always got pulled back at this point into my body. And when I did get pulled back into my body, it was kind of like the way people always talk about. I didn't know where I was at, and I started to cry. I didn't know, and that was bizarre to me, because here I was 15 years later from the event, and I was still experiencing it as if it happened yesterday, or the same moment, I should say. But what I remember about that experience would profoundly change the narrative of the way that I now talk about what we're here to do. And I think I've shared this with you a little bit. It's explicitly stated in the book. What I realized was that all of these beings actually, so you know how, okay, let me put it this way. Do you know how we always get told that we have a little aspect of divinity in us? There's a light in us, and then we have to tap into that light so we can tap into our divinity and all that.
Definitely.
So that is true. There was a bigger story behind that would change the narrative of everything. which is to say that we always assumed, the way we were raised, most of us, was we were told to assume that we were disconnected from the source.
Right.
That we had to earn our way back in some ritualistic way. Whether that's through the process of original sin or through the process of karma or what have you.
Right.
What I realized was that, well, that's for a whole different other discussion, but what I realized and what they wanted me to remember so I could come back and explain, and I've had discussions with near-death experiencers on this, is that we are not the creation of a thing that we call God or source or whatever you want to call it. We, as individual expressions of divinity, came together collectively as a community to experience ourselves in a greater form of ourselves to form oneness. In other words, we created God. God did not create us. And that was huge. And it took me a long time, Daniel, to come to grips with that, much less speak about it in public, because that changes the entire narrative. And if that wasn't enough, in later times, I would ask, just actually not too long ago, I would ask for some, okay, guys, if this is the story that I'm supposed to be telling, then can I get a little bit of reassurance that I'm not going to stick my neck out and who knows what would happen? I don't know if I told you this, but I was shown a vision once, and I'm not a biblical person, but I was shown an image of a chapter and a verse in the Bible. And it's chapter 1, verse 26 in Genesis, the first chapter. And in there, it talks about the creation of man, back then, man, now it's humanity. And in that sentence is full of plural words. God created man or humanity in their image, like us. Those plurals were there. They were never taken out of one of the most sacred books anywhere, right? And yet there it was, right at the beginning, the very first chapter. How we were created was in the image of all of these individual beings that collectively formed themselves as oneness. And that's the story that I was told to come back with. And since then, I've had many conversations, and a lot of people, the near-deathers especially, they all say the same thing. God, I knew this coming back, but I couldn't even come close to expressing that. I couldn't share that. I didn't know how to share that. So that's a huge thing, because as we go through the awakening, this is paramount to knowing how to awaken, ascend, and become the master of this illusion we call the game. So that's it.
So in addition to plugging your book, I'm going to plug my other favorite book. It's called Oneness.
Oh, pretty good.
by Rasha. And that's a whole nother subject at a whole nother time, but yeah.
I'm not familiar with that book, but I suspect that if you're plugging it, it probably means that there was a lot of what I said in what was in there. And if you look at books like that and other books, even ancient books, writings from ancient civilizations, sacred documents, there's references to this, that we are more divine than we even have the ability to even understand right now. Right. And once we realize that, literally, Daniel, game over. And that's what we're in right now. Not 100 years from now. That's what we're in right now.
Well, now, is it game over, or is it game next level?
Both. It's game over it's game over for this game. Then you do move on. And that's what happens when you go to the higher levels of dimension. You go on to new games. Yeah. But they're going to be different. The whole reason that this reality is rather unique, if you listen to some people, they'll tell you that this is a time in human history, and all type of history with this earth, that a new consciousness is being formed. Something that has never been tested to this level of extreme, where we actually will go on to a 6th and 7th level. And by the way, a 6th level of dimensionality is where we start to lose our connection with our body. We start to go back to being light again. We use our bodies to do, things like go from point A to point B in the multiverse, but we don't need it for things anymore to identify ourselves. We become light again. And when you get to that level of consciousness and beyond, you start to one will bring with them the ability to use contrast as a tool rather than something that has crippled them all their lives. And something that you can play with rather than fear. That hasn't happened in consciousness yet. I mean, there have been some civilizations that have done a pretty good job of playing with it, but we have tested this idea, this concept to the limit, and we have succeeded.
And there have been a few individuals who've been in command of that
And those individuals came here to show us what we were capable of, not to be followed, to show us what we were capable of being. And there's plenty of references in plenty of the sacred books that will show you that that is exactly what they were trying to do. We institutionalized it.
Yeah, I agree completely. So, reminds me of another book called Disappearance of the Universe. Have you heard of that one?
No, I haven't. What does that one go like?
Oh, it's too deep to get into right now. But the idea is that we get to a certain point and the game changes completely.
Yes. And that's not, some people will go, if they can start to embrace this concept, the next question they ask, when does this end? Well, it really never ends, but the drama that's being played out in this game, it does end. And it's interesting because people can conceptualize this, they can rationalize this, they could intellectualize this, but that's not what this time in human history is about anymore, Daniel. It is not about being able to have a great intellectual conversation with people across, a dining room table. It's about becoming it. It's about becoming your own wizard or master, sage, God, whatever you want to call it, and break out of this illusion. It's no different than when you're dreaming. And in fact, that's why in the first couple of chapters of the book, there's a lot of explanation about the dream states, because another way of looking at this is that we are in a dream. And just like with any dream, you are the main character of that dream. And if you're the main character of that dream, that means that everything revolves around you. And if everything revolves around you in this game, you are actually the centerpiece. And whether you go, well, what is that? How's that possible? You're in this dream, Franco, and you're in this dream, and you're in this dream. Well, that gets into overlapping realities, which we won't get into here. But let's just say that everybody, just like a virtual reality game that our kids love to play, where they can play on their own most of the time, but yet then they also draw people in from everywhere and anywhere. That's how this reality works. But in the time that you are the game. Everything that you're seeing, perceiving, is your game that you designed before you came here. And that's really hard for people to understand, because then it throws away all of the opportunity to blame others for everything, for your lot in life. All of a sudden, all of the responsibility, accountability is based on you. But that's the liberating thing, is that if it's based on you, then you could literally, Daniel, wake up any moment and reclaim what Caleb says, the rulership of who you are. And there's so many references to that in movies and stuff.
I've said to many people, I've been teaching classes for 10 years. And one of the things that I will say at appropriate times is, just like you can wake up in the middle of a dream and have a lucid dream and go, oh, wait, I'm dreaming.
Yes.
And then you can sort of manipulate the dream a bit. That's what's happening here. We're waking up within the dream of a reality, quote reality.
Oh, you see, this is exactly why you and I go off into tangents, because that's exactly it. That's exactly it. It's not metaphorical. The reason why some of us have lucid dreams, and more of us are having them now, is for that purpose. I was just telling somebody today, a student of mine, that the reason why I call him the dream maker. because he's really, 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 really good at these amazing dreams that have a lot of symbolism in there. And I'm telling him, you know, what's interesting is that you've become such a great dream maker in what you call your dream, your sleep state of physicality, when in actuality, you have to take what you are understanding is happening in your dreams to apply them to this dream. This is the ultimate dream. If you can use what you are getting through those dreams, you will break the code, so to speak, of how to get out of this game. And he just stood there and he was like, oh, you know, like, okay, I get it, you know, because he's a fabulous dream maker. But he was just, this is what I was getting at when I said about my mother moving the mountain. And this is what I talk about in the book. And this is why people, what I said to you early, maybe I didn't say it early on, but people desire to remember. They desire to remember. They're not here to learn anything. In fact, now I do remember saying this. So they are not here to learn anything, Daniel. They're here to remember. That's why they listen to these shows. That's why they go deep into IANDS and try to dig up clues that will help them to remember something that they already know. And so when my mother did what she did for years, decades, all I was enamored with was the fact that I had died and I came back. And oh, look, you know, wow, that's cool. And what does this mean? Am I special or am I not special? Whatever. But what I didn't see were the clues behind the clues, which are littered in our lives, littered everywhere. If we would just stop and look at them for what they are. And that was that she, in that moment, realized her divinity, whether she was cognizant or not of it, it doesn't matter. She tapped into her higher self and she caused that miracle to happen. And there are other instances in the book that I talk about, just what people would call bizarre, but those were clues. Those were ways in which to help us wake up, each one of us. That's why STE, spiritually transformative experiences, Daniel, that's why those things are on the rise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because people are going through that a heck of a lot more than even NDEs.
The veil is thinning and we're getting more in touch with the reality. So when you use, there's so much to cover, you know, we're never going to touch it all. But a key thing, I think, at this stage of this conversation, when we use the term illusion and game, many people just kind of like roll their eyes and turn it off. They're just like, nah, there's just too much. I can't believe it.
Yeah, I know.
But here's the crux of that is why, and you went through this, say some words about suffering in this life, in this.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a very deep question too. So I get that question asked a lot about our suffering, also suffering that we see in others on a grand scale. And as it relates to us, and I have to keep stressing this, when we came here, when we chose to come into this world, we had what some people call lesson plans or contracts or what have you. What that was a design sort of script of what you wanted to achieve in this lifetime. Now that's changed over many millennia because of where we're at now. But now, which is all that we really need to be aware of, is that when we use suffering now, it's a way in which that we designed, and I know this could be hard for some people, it's designed to help you wake up. Why? Because when you're in a heavy state of amnesia, you need something very forcefully to shock you into remembering something about who you really are. If you were just kind of strolling through life without any real major crisis or trauma, you would never have any reason to try to wake up. It would just not be there. There would be no incentive to do that. So the more drama and trauma, the more you are inclined to question this reality. And the beginning of the awakening starts from that. I have dozens and dozens and dozens of students who you can't imagine what their trauma has been. But all of them, even before I spoke to them, knew that somehow, some way that was related to why they were now here awakening.
Exactly. If everything is going well, you don't look for answers. You don't look to change anything. It's just like hunky-dory.
Exactly.
But one of the key things I think is that we can have challenges, but we don't need to suffer. I think suffering
No,
is optional.
that's just it. And, a lot of people, just what you just said, a lot of people would probably check out on that one too. They go, what? Are you kidding me? Come on. You've not been through what I've been through. You haven't experienced what I experienced. You can't say that. But the reality is, and again, this is a process of awareness. That's what the fourth dimension is. Okay. The fourth dimension is being aware of who you are, various levels of that until you get to God consciousness in the fifth dimension. You have to be fully aware, or at least begin to become fully aware, that the experiences you are having right now are meant to do one thing and one thing only: to wake you up. To wake you up, no matter what the drama, no matter what the trauma is, it's here to help you wake up. And even to the extent that if you see people out there who are suffering the tragedies that are happening of war and genocide and all those things, people will ask, what's their role? Well, as I said already, either they're going through a process of awakening and chose to go through that drama and trauma, or they actually are what others, and I'm sure you've heard this term and others have too, they're background people, they're backdrop people. They're here to be part of the play, part of your dream, to accentuate the drama in your life. They did this out of unconditional love so that they could come here and help you wake up. And also in the process, they also earn some sort of ascension points, because they don't ascend themselves, but they could hopefully come back here in another Earth school, another school, and live the part themselves.
Well,
it's all a school.
To get back to the game analogy, we are, I think, through many different levels, recreating echoes of the ultimate reality. And so we create games. And
Yes.
we're now creating, virtual reality games, and we're creating
Yes.
games where all sorts of things happen. But what happens is you don't play the game and then it's all done and you never play it again. You
Right.
play it again. You come back and you say, all right, I'm going to try this again.
Yes.
And I believe most of us in this environment here believe we're eternal spiritual beings.
Yes.
So this is one episode. It's not the ultimate. And it's hard for folks to accept in some cases, but I think
for
that
sure.
our worst suffering, when we look at it from the other side, it's like watching a parent watching a child fall on the playground and skin his knee or her knee, and that, they're crying, their tears, everything's terrible, but the parent knows he'll be okay, honey.
Exactly. And the irony of it all is that you are the child and the parent at the same time.
Let's
That's
talk
the
about
thing.
the inner child.
So the inner child is something that was really unfamiliar to me until I wrote the book. It was a chapter that I didn't know any of the chapters that I was writing. I would go in and channel, and then I'd start writing, and then I'd reread stuff. But this one was kind of a surprise to me, because out of nowhere, they decided, Kayla, to write this story about the inner child. And at first, as I reread it, I thought, oh, listen, this is a beautiful love story of a little child and how we are in our innocence. But the more that I would go back to that chapter, and the more that I would explore it within myself, I realized that the inner child is everything to do with the essence of who we are. Because the basic essence of who we are four things: love, peace, joy, and freedom, eternal freedom of being everything and nothing at all. Okay. And that's what the inner child is, but it's also mixed in with innocence and wonderment. And so what became pretty obvious to me, and again, this was later on referenced in all sorts of different manuals around the world, is that in order for one, let's just take for now within context Christianity. In order for one to access the kingdom of heaven, which, by the way, we already, I believe, can establish that the kingdom of heaven, when they say it's within us, it's the state of beingness that we know ourselves to be godly, God consciousness, Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Okay. It could also be called divine feminine. Okay. That state of consciousness exists within us to get there, to access that. All the great masters have said the same thing. All the masters, whether they were great or not, said the same thing. You have to do it through the eyes, through the embracement of being a child. And we would always go, oh, isn't that sweet? At least I did. I'd go, isn't that nice? You have to be a child. Okay, move on. What's next?
Right.
But there was more to that. Everything that is taught, at least everything that was shown through what I went through in my near-death experience and then future channeling, was there was a practice, and it's referred to, I know, like in the Buddhist tradition and the Hindu tradition, there's references to this. There's a reference to a practice of doing this child activity as an energy form of consciousness, using it as a way in which to unlock the doors, the gate, the gateless gate, whatever you want, a kingdom of heaven, to unlock the mysteries behind what lies behind that, which is basically the mystery of your truth. There was a reason why Yeshua said you have to embrace it as a child, because if you don't do that, we overcomplicate things and we make them so extremely difficult. We cannot see the truth, even if it was staring right in front of us, which, by the way, Daniel, it is staring in front of us, but we can't see it anymore. It's so complicated. And so there's a practice called the way of the inner child, which was given to me in many of my channels. And now I teach that as a way to decipher the reality of this truth. And it's in such a simple way that most of my students can't believe. I always tell them, you're not going to believe how simple this is, but it was never meant to be difficult. Never. It was never meant to be. And this fifth dimensional consciousness of godliness is already showing us that the things we thought were super complicated are not. They're meant to be simple.
Yes.
So
we overcomplicate.
oh my gosh. A lot of human doingness and not enough beingness. So much, even in our rituals of prayer and meditation. I show people, I can show people through the way of the inner child how to get into the stillness, which some people spend their whole lives trying to do. And I could do it in a few minutes. And that's not to brag, Daniel. It's to show you how simple this was meant to be.
And as you pointed out, we are both the parent and the child.
Yes.
And I've taught this in some of my classes, that you want to go and find that innocent child from your youth, from your adolescent, more,
Yes.
from your toddlerhood.
Yes.
And develop a relationship.
Yes.
And it's a current relationship. Like you were saying, time doesn't really exist. That child is still there. Many folks in the psychological community teach things about the wounds to the inner child and how the inner child, there's all sorts of therapies around healing. And so that's a whole nother subject.
But it's an important, Daniel, it's an important subject. If I could just maybe briefly comment on that, because there are, in not just the psychological worlds, but even in some of the new age stuff, if you want to call it that today, there's this whole idea that we have to heal the wounded child. And I will tell you right now, there is nothing to heal with the wounded child, because that wounded child, from a spiritual essence, is divinely omnipresent and potent. It is beyond anything we could possibly imagine. It is not at all damaged. Now, does that mean that you didn't have damage in your traumas as a human being? Yes. But the irony is that I show people how the inner child is the one that actually helps you as the child, even if you're an adult, remember who you are and get through your traumas. It's the inner child, that same thing that you're trying to fix.
Yeah.
That essence is what you use to simplify your traumas so you can get beyond what you thought were barriers to your existence. And when you do that, you're flipping again the narrative, you're simplifying everything, and you're showing the power of the inner child. And so everything, as you can tell from the world of contrast, is going to be flipped upside down. And you see it in the book. All of these attributes that were given to me by Caleb, the things that you would think, how could this really make a super duper difference? Things like, well, of course we know about intention, but imagination is a big one. How can imagination do anything to really ultimately change my reality, much less the world? Well, what we don't understand is the imagination is a powerful mystical ingredient in who you are as God. It's a gate. It's a key to a gate that allows you to unlock yourself into what you really, really are. Your imagination is memories of something else that you existed in before you were this body. And so the very things that we've been told to downplay are actually the things that really were meant for us to remember so we can use them. And so that goes for imagination, goes for faith, it goes for a whole bunch of those attributes that are listed in the book, as well as what we've been talking about here in terms of the inner child and how it's wounded and stuff. And again, go ahead.
You might say, instead of healing the inner child, the wounded child, the child is healing the parent.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of this game. It throws everything upside down. That's exactly the way to say it.
Now we've officially got another 20 minutes, but I'm going to say, we can go over if that's okay with you.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
So we're going to put that subject to the side. A whole nother conversation about inner child. We're going to do part 2 and 3, and we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, part of this evening's promise was that we would talk about the process of authoring.
Yes.
This is an author spotlight. And you are a reluctant spiritualist.
Yes, I was.
And an accidental reluctant author.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about that part of your journey, please.
Yeah, and I think this is really, I've done another podcast with a college that then it was their literary department. And kind of, you would think, what am I talking to their students about? And it was because it really gets to the creative aspect of who you are, which as I was telling this particular class and professor, was that the arts are here again is a great example of how the arts have been dummied down to make people believe that they have no role to play in any reality, in any society, much less in this new age society of technology, at least not in any real super relevant way. But it's in the creation of what you do that you become these great writers, these great philosophers, these great musicians that really change the way that we view ourselves and the world, and really tap into something now more than ever that hasn't been there. And that's our ability to tap into our soul. And so when it came to me, I had no intention of writing any book. There was no book in my horizon. And I had an intimate conversation one day with the collective, with Caleb, and they said, you will write a book. And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, you're going to write this book and it's going to be 10 chapters, but they wouldn't say what it was going to be. And I said, all right. I really did not have the greatest writing skills. Okay. But I just didn't even have content.
I must say, for anybody listening, this is extremely well written. Okay.
Thank you.
And I've told you that before. It's really well written. And
thank you.
Part of it is because it's not theoretical. It's not, from up above. It's very human. It's very relatable. And we follow your journey.
Thank you. And that's really interesting you said that, because when I began to prepare myself for this daunting task of writing a book, I watched a few YouTube channels and I was kind of, where do I start? How do I write this? And again, through a discussion that I had with Caleb, they said, we will show you, we will show it to you so that it can be everybody's story. And when I wrote the introduction to the book, which I don't know if this is common or not, but when I wrote the introduction to the book, it was after I had finished the book. And I was literally kind of recapping the experience of my quest and journey all wrapped together in this book and what I found about myself in the process. And I realized at that point I had already realized this to some extent, but I realized at that point that the book was truly written in a way that even though my circumstances might have been different than yours, the whole experience of being a human being, waking up to your spiritual beingness, to your greatness, was where it really came together for people like you and others who said, I got this. I could really feel this. And I said, thanks. I didn't know, so that would be my big advice to people writing, is to really allow yourself to tell your story through the eyes of others.
It's very authentic. And I like how, at points you stop and you say, now, I'm sure you're asking yourself X,
Yes.
and of course, yeah, definitely. So that makes it so relatable.
Yeah, there were many times where I just felt like moments of out of mindness, where I just felt like I was asking similar questions as I was writing them, which is why it came across that way, because I was always acting at times, not always, but at times it was like really bizarre, because I would feel that I was looking at myself being sort of this channel that was also taking all this information. So I was kind of like I call it out of mind experience. And I was asking those questions because people always ask me, well, since you know all of this stuff, you must be like really like, crazy good at whatever you do. I mean, like, spiritually, like you've got it all together. And I will tell you that certainly this whole process, this whole journey, this whole quest has made me see my world so entirely different than most people. But it wasn't without its hard knocks. It wasn't without its trials and tribulations. And so I think I told you, and if I haven't, I wrote the book in a way that I knew they were going to show through transparency my vulnerabilities, things that I didn't really feel comfortable talking about. But it was because I wanted them to see that you often see people like us and others who on the outside can articulate everything so beautifully now spiritually, and you don't see the process, the human process by which they went through to get there. They all of a sudden one day they appear and they're like, who is this person? And I wanted to show them more than anything how not to do things, that this was not a manual necessarily to say do A, B, C. Nobody has that kind of a roadmap. Okay. But certainly I wanted people to see the human side of me as much as the spiritual side.
Yeah. And it's awesome. We've got a few questions. Are you ready for a few questions?
Absolutely.
All right. So getting back to, well, one person had to leave early, and Eric says, thank you, Franco and Daniel and IANDS. Blessings. So that was
Thank you.
I'm going to take this question next. It's from Anne Francis Ellis. Hello, Anne. She's a very special person to us here at IANDS. She helps with editing the stories that people submit of their experiences. She asks, can you teach us the way of the inner child? Can you give us a sketch of what that's about?
Yes, and thanks for asking that question. When we first met, Daniel, we were talking about, so like, would you, meaning me, would you want to consider doing something in showing, doing a workshop or something to show people, more practically what it is that you have been talking about? And I have to tell you that even up until that moment, I wasn't quite clear, really, Daniel, what that meant. But in recent months, it's become very crystal. And to Anne's question, with your, hopefully with your permission, with the people's permission from IANDS, I am going to put together a workshop series that will get them started on the way of the inner child, to give them enough substance so they can really start to explore who they are and how they treat life, their life, through the eyes, literally, of a divine child. And yes, so the answer is yes, yes, yes. It isn't something that, you know, I could say here in 10 minutes how to do it, which a lot of people will give. I've had people that have asked me, give it to me, you know, like, give me the secret sauce. And I'm like, it's not that I can't tell you the secret sauce. It's that there is a process of becoming the secret sauce that really requires you to go deeply within yourself, so that you can embrace that inner child as something of a divine essence of who you are. Then and only then can you access those things that are behind the gateless gate, or in the kingdom of heaven.
And you are, in a sense, birthing that inner child now, that process.
Absolutely. Yes,
So
absolutely.
we're honored that you're interested in doing it with us.
I'm excited to do it, because this is exactly what people have been waiting for. It's, you know, I think I may have told you this, and just a short digression, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One of the things that happened when I came back, and it's something that I don't share very much. I am now, because I feel like it's important within the context of what we're talking about. There's a concept that I know many who are listening here know, and it's called a walk-in. And in my experience, I was a walk-in. In other words, I spent a good chunk of my life not only seeing the world differently, experiencing the world differently, but experiencing myself differently. I never felt quite like I was fitting perfectly into this vessel. And I didn't realize it until much later in life that I had a walk-in experience where the original soul that was in that body chose to stay. It was then that a walk-in came in with a specific purpose to come back. And that purpose was, at least in part, to remind people who they are. And so the three basic tenets: you are God, you are experiencing yourself in a simulation or a dream, and you're here to wake up. Those are the three basic tenets. But you do that within the context of teaching people how to remember what the power is behind the child, the way of the inner child, this practice that was lost thousands of years ago and is now coming back to show humanity how to bridge that gap.
So there's a spot in the book where you talk about the three, I can't remember, but there was the teacher.
Yes.
The healer.
Yes.
And what was the third?
And it's called a guide or guardian.
The guardian. Can you say a bit about that?
Yeah. So, and I feel like this is something that's kind of innate in us. We feel like there's this other role we're supposed to be playing. And for those who are waking up right now, it was what I was interpreting in that part of the book was within the context of these time periods that we are now in. And the time period that we're now in is in the second, we're just past the second stage of the awakening. And in that stage, which started in December of 2019 and ended in December of 2022. When I say it ended, it didn't mean that it just ended. I mean, the main, what we would call seeding or programming or downloading or upgrading happened in those 3-year period, in that 3-year period. That was designed to help wake up those that were here, that chose to come here to become either a teacher, a healer, or a guardian. In other words, these are people, and I'm sure that these are many who are listening here, who are actually here not because they came here to ascend. They came here to help with the ascension. Yeah. They have been here before in this Earth School or in other schools like this all around the universe and multiverse. And those are the ones that are waking up. And their three primary functions are either to teach the truth, to help remind people of who they are, to teach the truth, to be actual healers, not just physical healers, but healers of the soul, so that they can help people wake up. And then to be the guides or guardians. They will ultimately, some of these will have the responsibilities of walking through with people their own journey and quest. What I describe them as, they are the physical manifestations of all of these guardians that we talk about in the metaphysical world. They are truly, truly physical manifestations of those guardians here on earth. And they become your guardians as you walk through this process. And those are happening right now, not 100 years from now. I want to stress this, Daniel, right now.
Amen, brother.
Yeah, I keep telling people the irony of all ironies is that we've been waiting our entire lives, thousands of years, for something to happen, to come out of the sky, to, lights, chariots, whatever it is that you've always wanted to see. And the irony of all ironies is that we've always just been waiting for one thing, for us. That's it. We've been waiting all these years, these millennia, for us to wake up. And that's it. We've always had the ability to do it.
I think it's why so many of us feel like we're here for something, but we don't know what it is. We're like, what? I can't remember. It's like walking into the room, what did I come into this room for?
Exactly.
Was it my glasses? No, I've got my glasses. Why did I come? And
Exactly.
and you're here for something, but what? So I love the teachers, healers, and guides, guardians.
Yes.
I've been getting messages for the last 6 months. Teach the teachers, heal the healers.
Wow. Wow, Daniel. Wow, Daniel. I really believe that, individuals like you and others who are listening, and just so many others, are getting the same messages. I literally can tell you that in the short period of time that I finally came out of my spiritual closet and wrote the book, and then the book became a documentary interview with Auntie Jen, that in that time period, I've been blessed with talking to people all over the world and working with many of those people, and they're getting the same messages. It's what's so cool about this is that they're getting the same messages. They feel alone, and I have to tell them, no, you're not alone, because there are so many people now that are getting that exact same messages, the exact same messages. This is now the time. This is now the time.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, ding, ding, ding. I mean, and it's exciting. It should be really, I mean, this is what we've been waiting for. And as I've told people in other shows, we've been waiting, 50 years from now, it'll happen. Or no, it's now.
Well, I love that you mentioned the 3 stages. So one of them was basically the 2010, 11, 12 space.
Yes.
Which I know that was when I couldn't deny the pull to be a teacher.
Yes.
And it was like, okay, I've just got to start teaching.
Yes. It was like you didn't even understand why, you just did it. You just had to do it.
I sort of did, but it was like, you just kind of follow the leader and the path appears.
Well, good.
Like that,
well,
right?
Good for you, Daniel, because I was underneath the bed trying to hide from it at that time. So good for you.
And then you presaged, or your guides presaged, the COVID experience, which was another major awakening for the world.
Yes.
Which we're still, and then tell us now, we're in this fairly short period of this 3rd stage.
Yes. Yeah, and one of the things that I wanted, that it's kind of referenced in the book a little bit, is that there were all these other things that were occurring also during that time that helped our awareness of who we are. And one of the biggest ones, which really wasn't said much in the book, was there were many who came here to raise awareness over sexual equality. And why that's so important is because one of the things that you realize when you leave this plane of existence, in this thing that you want to call heaven or 5th or 6th dimension, whatever you want to call it, is that there is no such thing as gender. And that is huge for the evolution of our awareness here. It's no coincidence that one of the major driving forces of waking ourselves up has been around sexual equality and gender equality, and more the sexual part, because there is no such thing as sexual genders up there anywhere in the metaphysical space. There's just none. And so the fact that now there's LGBTQ plus, and I'm so glad that there was that plus, is important.
And so many people who've chosen to come in one gender and transition to another, you know.
Massive. Because we're both, if there's anything, if it were anything, we're both genders. If there's anything, and it's really, I want to really loosely define that. There is a feminine and there is a masculine energy, that there is.
Yes.
But there is no such thing as gender.
But
therefore, there is no such thing as a sexual preference. You just be who you are.
Yes, okay.
No, and
I certainly really have a preference.
Well, certainly you may, and others may, but those who actually push the envelope and chose to come here to express that concept as how it truly exists in the other side of this equation were really trailblazing, not just that issue. They were trailblazing the whole idea, such as with religion. There is no such thing as religion when you cross over. There's no such thing as gender. There's no such thing as hierarchy. You don't get you don't get points for any of that stuff. It doesn't work that way.
And let's touch on autism. That is just another experience of being human that, you know, so many people think we have to cure autism. Well, maybe autism's here to teach us.
Absolutely, Daniel. I just recently realized, because I work with a few autistic kids on the behest of their parents. And what I told their parents is what I'm going to say here. Autism is not an illness. Autism is the state of beingness at a higher frequency. These children chose to come here at a slightly higher frequency, some more than others in terms of where you would quote unquote put them on the spectrum. But they chose to do this so that one day when frequencies started to rise to the extent they are now, their light would shine. They would be the ones that would hold light and share light and be the voice for those that weren't able to express themselves. Their time has not come yet. And that's the most important thing. Their time has not come yet, but it's coming really darn soon. And when I speak to these autistic kids, some of them are younger, most of them are in their late teens, early 20s, because this kind of happened in the last 25, 30 years. These kids, when I speak to them the way that I'm speaking to you, and I get into these deep dialogue conversations about how the universe works and how the metaverse works and how all of this works, they get it. In some cases, they actually explain it to me before I finish my concept in full. And their parents will sit there and go, what? It just happened. And I said, this is what I'm telling you. When you tap into their frequency, not the other way, you are asking them to tap into a lower frequency, which they cannot do. It's exactly why when we ask people, well, people ask me, why don't we have more ET experiences? Why don't we have more of these divine experiences showing themselves? Because they vibrate at such a high level. That it isn't that they can't vibrate at a lower level. It is very taxing for them to vibrate at a lower level if they do, and they will. But more importantly, if we tried to actually mirror that vibration without actually giving ourselves a chance to get there, we literally would blow up. I mean, we would go insane. But they are already wired that way. And so that's why it's really cool when you tap into their vibration, when I tap into their vibration, it's easy for me to talk to them, and it's easy for them to talk. Their parents are just sitting and we're having a conversation. So I don't know if so-and-so is going to have much of a conversation with you, Franco. I said, no worries. I'll just tap into their frequency. And then boom. And they just blossom. I said, this is what you're going to see in the future.
I knew someone who has an autistic child, and this child was mostly nonverbal, very nonverbal, but they gave her a special IQ test and it scored like crazy high. And they said, you know, we had no idea. And she said, well, I'm autistic, not stupid.
Exactly. Exactly. That's been the major misconception, which, now it's starting to change. The narrative is changing. Now they're in a spectrum. Now people are starting to realize it's not an illness. They themselves, I believe that, I forget the term that they use, they're in a group of mental diversity, so that they really actually, celebrate their diverseness rather than hiding it the way that they had to do all these years, because they've been categorized as something less than we are. And that's actually so not true. So not true.
So just like the transgender side and the various sexual
Yes,
preferences,
yes, 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 yes.
they're expanding our concept of who we are
Yes,
as a
yes,
whole
yes.
society.
Yes, yes, yes.
All right,
That's all I
let's
can
get
say
to a
is yes,
few.
yes, yes.
Let's get to a few questions here. Now we have some comments. So
Yeah.
and I'm going to take these out of order, so don't worry if you're listening. So this is from Sophia. She says, wow, wow, wow. Confirmation, confirmation, confirmation. When you spoke of the collective, to me, it's like a drop of water in the ocean.
Oh,
So
that's beautiful.
Are you a drop of water in the ocean, or are you the ocean in a drop, right?
Yes.
She also says, when you speak of the inner child, I think of the scripture that says, suffer the children to come unto me, means to me to deny yourself, to comprehend as an adult, but as a child.
Yes.
So to be the child.
Yes. And again, I don't know if I said this enough. Our reality is littered with clues, some more blatant than others, of what this game is all about.
So here's my, I think when you get into this space, which I've been in, like I said, for about 10, well, 11 or 12 years, the synchronicities are crazy.
Yes.
And you start to wonder what is going on, right?
Right.
So I had your book in ebook format. And by the way, the Kindle version isn't quite available yet, or is it almost available?
It wasn't available up until about a month ago, but
when I last checked, it was down again. So
thank you for
I've
letting me know.
been through that with another publisher. But there is an EPUB version if somebody wants the ebook, which is what I've been mainly reading. But I got this yesterday, the physical, and it just opened. And where does it open to? It opens to, quote, so if everything is a product of my imagination, why can't I make my dreams come true? Unquote, you will ask. And this is on page 111. Now that is my number.
Yes,
111 is my number. Okay. Oh. And then it says, like in The Sorcerer's Apprentice, you must learn how to use your attributes to create and direct your imagination. Yes. Well, sitting on my desk is Mickey's hat from The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
No.
Swear to God. Swear to God. It's over there. I won't get up to get it. But anyway, let's take a few more items.
That is great. That is awesome.
And that's only one of several major synchronicities here. I was listening to the book. One of the things I like to do is just start it reading for me on my phone, and then I'm gardening, right?
Yeah.
And I'm digging up, and just as I'm struggling with this giant root, it says something about the root of the problem. So
oh my gosh. Right. I love it.
Anyway,
it's like I said, it's littered with things like that.
Okay, so Adrian asks, can you say something about death? That's a very vague question, but I'm sure we can say something about death.
Well, one of the things that's coming through right now, because I feel that this is what Adrian's asking, is, well, even if it isn't, this is how death is going to play out over the next decade. Okay, we're living in a time where what Caleb, the collective, calls the age of miracles. And in that time period, sooner than later, but maybe not tomorrow, but in this decade, things such as death will no longer exist. This is what is meant by the coming of heaven on earth. We don't have to physically, and I want to stress, physically die in order to experience what you already are in the supernatural. I've mentioned that the supernatural is called supernatural, but the funny thing is that in the place that we all come from, it's natural. We live in a subnatural world here. It's not supernatural, but in the way that we view it, it will be supernatural, hence the age of miracles, because we'll see things and experience things that we've never seen and experienced before. And there will be, this is one of those biggies that I had to go back to the collective and say, are you sure I'm supposed to say this? There will be no death. There will be no disease. There will be no aging. There will be no hunger. There'll be none of those things, any of those things, any which way from Sunday that we have been accustomed to experience. This is what is known as heaven on earth. And so that death will no longer exist in the way that we have viewed it.
Amen, brother.
Yay.
So here's a question from Gina, my friend Gina. Hi, Gina. OMG, yes. Can we hold the position of all three, teacher, healer, and guardian at the same time?
Yes.
Or do we need to pick one?
No.
Okay. The answer
Everybody
is
will
yes.
have abilities to be all. You will just choose to be one more than the others, but you will have the ability. And healing, so that we go back again, healing of the soul is the main thing. That's what Yeshua and all these others did here, was to try to heal that. If we are talking about healing of the body, that's where we as humans love to play around with, and that healing will come where we will naturally be able to use, and it's already happening in many various parts of the world. We just don't hear about it, but where we will actually become physical healers of all sorts of ailments before those ailments no longer exist. So you can be all of that. You are all of that.
Excellent. Sophie has another question, which I definitely want to answer. Where can I purchase the book? And the answer is Amazon and your website, which is?
It's The Closet Spiritualist. You got to remember to put the "the" in there. The Closet Spiritualist. Yes, the name of the book. Exactly.
.com.
Yes. And you can get information on the book there. There's links to the various bookstores that you can buy it at, and also all the information about the services in the way of the inner child training that I do with students. I call them students intentionally because one day they will be the teachers, they will be the healers, they will be the guardians and the guides that will go out and actually remind people of the truth, not their truth, but of the truth that defines all of us.
Excellent. Denise asks, how did you tap into the autistic child's frequency?
Well, this one's going to be a little bit hard to explain, but I just did it naturally, Denise. One of the things that I have the ability to do from the onset, but this is not unique to me, is that I have the ability to tap into the frequency of the individual soul when I meet with them. So it's like a language, and it's just natural for me to be able to feel that frequency. I do it naturally with everybody, and I could tell he and she, there are two of them, and I could just tap into it. It's very simple. That's how natural it's going to be for all of us in whatever clairvoyant area that we explore. And that this is a kind of, I want to just digress a second, because people always ask, how did you start to talk, actually exchange conversation with the collective? And I told them that long time ago, and this is not actually unique to me. A lot of people who channel and like Esther and Abraham, they do it. She did it the same way. Long time ago, I was told, start talking to yourself and have conversations with yourself. And it's a muscle. It's not a really hard muscle, but you have to use it. And one day, if you allow yourself to get out of the way, you're going to start getting thoughts back. And then you have to decide whether you're going to believe those thoughts. And so we talk about faith in different ways in sort of the coursework that we work on, because if you allow yourself to get out of the way, you will start a dialogue. And in a similar way, you will start to feel frequency. Everything in the metaphysical world is about frequency. It's not about audio. It's not about talking. There's no talking there. You hear through your senses, and everything more than you can imagine gets picked up. And it's like a conversation, the richest, beautiful conversation you could have with anything. And so tapping into frequencies is a natural thing you do. It's talking that becomes difficult.
Well, there's a wonderful analogy in our phones, in that, there's all these frequencies all around us, but my phone only picks up one of them.
Exactly.
Anyway.
No, it's very true.
Here's a question from Johan in Belgium. Hello, Johan. He's a good friend. On suffering. I see a majority of people on earth, like your mother at the hospital, shocked out of their wits, checked out, quote unquote. What advice can you give to people who are so shocked they are checked out, but still not awake, still not at the stage of feeling gratitude and creating miracles? I have some things to say, but I want to hear what you have to say.
There will come a time very soon here when we will understand the process of breathing spiritually. I'm not talking about what you do in yoga class or in some other meditation form where you go breathe in, listen to your breathing out. That's all good. It's all good, Daniel. I'm not taking away from anybody who does that. Please don't misconstrue that. Okay. I am truly a master at that. I spend tens of hours a day trying to do that. There's another form of breathing, which is a spiritual inhaling of energy and exhaling of energy, which is also taught in the way of the inner child. It's not something that's difficult to understand. It's actually extraordinarily different. And part of the equation is to understand that the exhaling part of the breathing is to see things through the eyes of compassion. But you cannot do that unless you can see yourself through the eyes of compassion. And that's where people get stuck. Everything that you need to see in your outer world has to be an expression by which you see yourself. And we were never taught how to do that for the most part. And so it's a remembering process of what that means. Now, can you do that to somebody who's grieving? A little bit, yes. I've actually worked with people to help them to see the process. And you know what? They actually intuitively understand when I tell them why this is happening. They get it. They don't it doesn't necessarily take away all their pain, but they get it at a deeper level. This is what I mean by tapping into the soul. But you do at least try to get them to see things through the eyes of compassion, even if they're going through a process of suffering. I do this all the time with students. It's the first thing that we have to cover, because if we can't see ourselves through the eyes of compassion, you cannot change anything, whether it's something immediate in your life with trauma or something in the past with trauma. And like I told you, there's a lot of doozies in terms of what I've heard of people's lives. But they immediately, Daniel, and I'm not exaggerating, they immediately pass those up once they can see things through the eyes of compassion, through their own expression of compassion to themselves as divinity. So it's a little bit of a process for somebody if you just meet them and they don't know anything from anything, or they're not aware enough to know anything, but it does resonate. You plant a seed. Everything's about planting a seed in those that are not awakened. Everything's about genetic. This gets a little bit dicey here, but everything's about coding. Everything that you're doing is you're coding the spiritual, what's called the divine DNA in the individual. And even if they don't get it today, somewhere along the way, they'll have an aha moment, and it will resonate why they had that experience, even though it was traumatic.
And here's a good time to mention that you have some diagrams in the book, which I won't try to describe. Another good reason to check it out. I would also say that it's okay for those people who are checked out or in whatever state they're in. It's all good.
Yes.
They're going to come awake at the right time, at the right pace for them. So
Absolutely. And it gets back to everything happens of this nature to help you wake up. It may not be immediate, but I assure you it will come back and you will go, whoa, really, this is what it was really all about. And I don't even have to tell them. They just realize it.
Yeah. And it's like the autism thing, they're fine. You just
Yes.
have to relate to them on the level they're at, and it evolves anyway.
Yes,
Okay.
we evolved because they're already a little bit ahead of us, but we have to evolve to them, not the other way around. And that's the tough thing for people to understand. We are a bit neophytish when it comes to how we understand consciousness. And this is just a variation of consciousness that we're looking at. We're being gifted by these individuals with autism. We've been gifted with people who have other forms of supposedly mental health conditions. It's not that they have any type of mental health condition. It's like, how do you define somebody who isn't relating to this, let's call it quote unquote warp society? We don't conform to it. And we call them somehow abnormal. That's really pretty low standard because they see the world much differently, much, much differently.
So here's a comment from Camila on YouTube. I worked as an art therapist at a children's hospital, so I totally get the quote, being a child, amazingness.
Yes.
And
It's
so go ahead.
no, for her, she sees it, experience it. It's so profoundly beautiful and powerful to break through those barriers that we have put on ourselves or that have been put on to us by society or what's called the social construct in the book. It's not an evil Illuminati. These were just planned in the game to help divert us from the attention of who we are. But all of these things, convolute and create complexity to something that's so innocent and really viewed in wonderment. There's one thing that I want to stress, that there's this thing called, and people know it, The Power of the Now, right? It's a book. It was written, right? But let me explain that in maybe a slightly different way, okay? Everything that happens is right now. And so if you could just allow yourself to step out of yourself, out of what you know yourself to be as this analytical consciousness being, and just allow yourself to observe the now as if it were something that is actually happening at this moment, just before the moment actually gets created and manifested. If you could somehow jump into the stillness, and it's again very easy to do, and see that as a place of creation where something exists before nothing ever was, then you realize that every moment of your life is beautiful, astonishing, magical, not just because it is, but because you're creating it. And all of a sudden, now you give yourself that ability to stop and be in the moment and start creating instead of reacting. When I started to do that in my life, Daniel, it was extraordinarily amazing to not just see the world as an illusion and some sort of play on a screen, but when you become the screen,
Yes,
before it actually starts to emote images, wow.
it's that saying, it's not happening to you, it's happening through you.
Yes,
There's
and
all these wonderful.
it's being done through you, and it was done by you.
Yeah.
That's the thing that a lot of people don't always get. It's like, oh, it's coming through, it's coming through me or for me. But I have to stress, who did this, who designed this, who decided, bring it on, give it all to me? It was you, because you're a supreme being. And that's why you could do this, because this is not easy. This is a game that really forced consciousness to grow in a way it never could. And that's exciting, because it literally is, Daniel, literally is creating another universe in another dimension. And I explain that a little bit in the book. There'll be some more about it in my second book, but it is completely aligned with the way that astrophysics discusses the way in which the universe was created. But I will really simplify it for people, in that I will show how consciousness created this universe and how it creates universes all over the place. But this one is very unique. This one is very, very, very unique, which is why everything in this universe, multiverse, multidimension, parallel reality, all of it is focused on this period right now. And it really is exciting. Even though we don't necessarily see it, many of us feel it.
Yes. Well, we've got a few more questions, but I'm going to tie things up here now.
Okay.
One of the questions is, if an enlightened person commits suicide, does it mean that they are not enlightened? Well, it depends on your definition of enlightenment. Let's leave it at that.
I could answer that a little bit more if you don't mind.
Please.
Okay. We are living right now in a very unique period. I keep wanting to stress this. The rules that may have applied in the past to some extent do not apply now. It is not to say that I in any way, shape, or form condone that or not, but here's the reality. And it's discussed about this in the book. We are now at a point where we are only charged with one thing: to wake up, to ascend. And Caleb talks about this in some length, in that they say that in the third stage, which is the stage that comes at the year 2029 to the year 2032, that's where we fully break away, completely break away from what is called fifth dimensional reality and third dimensional reality. Some people have referred to this in many ways with what Dolores Cannon had done with their thousands of interviews with people. But this is very real, okay? And in that time period, those that are here to ascend, and even those that came here to help ascend, but I'm going to focus primarily on the ones who came here to ascend. They are being given every single opportunity to ascend. Now, if they don't, for some reason, don't get there, then Caleb talks about what happens with the next Earth School. They come back and they become, as you would think, right? When you have to repeat a class, even though you failed the class, you're still ahead of the curve, okay? They become the great teachers and masters of that school down the road. They will ascend much faster, okay? But in this Earth School, they will be given every opportunity to ascend in this Earth School so that it can go with the rest of the class. And therefore, we are not just living one life here. We are living literally tens of thousands of lives in this particular moment in time. If by chance one of those aspects of your essence decides to check out, commit suicide, it is not, and never has been, something that is deemed unworthy or unnatural or sinful or anything like that. That essence goes back into the light where the other essences are already still here. And the idea is that one of them will hopefully do it. And when it does, there is a thing called entanglement. And entanglement means that what happens to you happens to everybody. And if you're experiencing yourself in thousands and thousands and thousands of lives right now, if one of you gets it, everybody wins. That's how it works.
But I would say, if you're suffering enough to think about that, remember that it takes your suffering and it spreads it to everyone you know who's left behind. It's not a great thing to do.
Yes, Daniel, but I really want to put it in context again, and I'm not condoning.
It's not judgmental. It's not judgmental.
Yeah, that when people do this, if they feel, and by the way, I've had a number of students who had reached that point before and during the time that I started to see them. There is an innate program within them that causes them not to want to do this because they're here for a specific purpose. They came here to do something very great. But if they do, they understand that they did what they could with the most that they had, and it was done. They came here, they did it, they tried unconditionally out of love for humanity. And that's really it. Nothing else. It does create pain and suffering, yes. But remember what we said at the beginning. Sometimes we come here and we create instances or circumstances that are unacceptable by our social standards. But when we look at it from a different perspective, from a higher perspective, it is viewed as something that was done out of unconditional love, knowing that maybe this particular entity came here not knowing for sure they were going to be able to break the code, but they were going to give it their damnedest. And well, they didn't. but they did it out of unconditional love. And in that process, hopefully help those that were left grieving wake up themselves. That would be their final gift if they had to give it to them.
There you go. Well, I'm going to close with a couple of quotes from the end of your book. This is from Caleb. The time has come for you to be that light, to hold your brilliance as you shine upon the darkness of your world, to use that energy to call upon the universal light of the inner child that stands ready to usher in the greatest awakening humanity has ever known. So good.
Thank you. You know what? I will tell you something, that when I wrote that and I gave myself, they wanted to write a full chapter, and I said, can we kind of leave it until the end? And they were like, yeah, that's fine. And then I said, guys, go for it. Just right. I was bawling. I was bawling. The intensity of what they said at the end, how we will someday, all of us will someday be viewed as the children of the light that shines brightly within us all. I was bawling. It's just beautiful. I mean, I'm not saying about my writing. It was just beautiful what they said. It gives us so much faith in what we can be and are and will do in this lifetime. So thank you for sharing that.
Brother, I words escape me. This has been awesome. I love you.
I love you too.
And I look forward to speaking with you more.
Thank you, Daniel. Likewise. Thank you.
And thank you to our audience. Check out more at isgo.iands.org and Franco's website, theclosetspiritualist.com. And we'll see you on the path.
Bye-bye.
All right. Love you, Franco. Bye.
Thank you, Daniel. We'll talk soon.
All right. Well, that was awesome. You're awesome.
Oh, man. Loved it. I was so looking forward to this. Just something about it drew me. I was excited to see you again, to talk to you again. But I just knew that this conversation would just go in so many great places. And I was excited where it went.
Have a great evening.
Thank you, Daniel.
Until we meet again.
We will soon. I'm going to be picking your brain on the outline. So thank you.
And the Kindle thing.
And the Kindle thing. God, I'll be talking even sooner. Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you. Love you all.